Welcome back to the Paindora Podcast. I am Dr. Katie, and I'm here joined by Dr. Kevin. And we are going to just start jumping into this idea of talking about things that are not just pain related, but also related to challenges in life. And of course, today it might be a little more pain directed with a little bit of a slant on just talking about research. But Dr. Kevin brought up an interesting article. If you want to tap into that, I'm not sure what the date is or when that came out, but do you mind jumping into something we wanted to discuss?
Yeah, no problem. So this is from the December 3rd, 2019 JAMA article, and it's an opinion piece by John Ioannidis at Stanford, and it is on neglecting major health problems and broadcasting minor uncertain issues in lifestyle science. And what I particularly like about this is we spend so much time arguing about minutia on what's important and neglecting like the big things. And I think that's probably a theme for a lot of things that we do in life, but particularly for health, right? There's all this stuff, and he was basically saying how many, research articles had been published in 2019, and then they did the Zillow algorithm thing, and they found out which ones got the most press. And the ones that tended to get the most press were the ones that were sort of about ridiculous nonsense, such as, does drinking coffee have a health benefit? Well, if it does, it's super minor. And if it doesn't, it's not a big deal unless you're drinking 62 cups of coffee a day. And rather than that, maybe we should be focusing on the major levers, because there's like little levers and big levers, and you can mess around with little levers all you want, and they're not going to get you much change or benefit. Or you can focus on the 1, 2, or 3 big levers and have major impact on what your life and health is. And it's just remarkable. Like, and you can look at this in different ways. So all the stuff with apps and phones and these little devices and tracking this and rings that are supposed to measure your perfect sleep, but somehow a ring on your finger is going to be able to measure your sleep better than a sleep study does, and then tell you whether or not you're sleeping well. I mean, it's just like, I can see why we want to get fascinated by it, but it is like, instead, why don't you just focus on a good bed routine? Instead of spending $200 on a magic ring that there's no data on, why don't you spend $50 on a good sleep aid, good pillow, and devise a consistent bedtime routine so that you're sleeping consistently.
Right. No, it's interesting. I think probably I think about apps or things on my phone that kind of remind me of things that I don't feel like the biggest needle movers of things, but if it's going to be utilized, I find it as just I enjoy it, or it's just I geek on it versus like really, believing that that's going to be changing my life for me. So I think that it's all in the context probably of how it's presented too. If people are so fixated on it and overanalyzing it and not looking at the big picture, I think I definitely agree. I'm definitely an Apple Watch user, so it is surprising, and I don't work for them. But there's something about, I can tell when if I'm holding my breath or I'm in a stressful moment, it's telling me to breathe, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I kind of knew that, and it's just a reminder that I need to slow down and take a breath. So, I think it can play a role, but it's not like the biggest mover in changing our life. And obviously that article is not just about pain, it's dealing with a lot of different lifestyle things. Are there certain things that they were talking about?
So major drivers of health, there's only like 4 or 5 really. I break it down into, you have to move, you have to eat, you have to, move consistently, eat real food, avoid toxins, and then stress is the other big one. And in this particular article, and what I liked about this is he goes, these are, uncontested, incontrovertible kind of things, rather than arguing whether or not a ketogenic diet is more appropriate than a Mediterranean diet or whatever. Instead of focusing on eat real food, not too much of it, like Michael Pollan would say. But the biggest ones for health, if you're looking at the United States, the biggest is don't smoke, or if you do smoke, quit. The second one was exercise, and that comes down to increasing movement and consistency of movement. Then it was two of them. He said, don't eat too much and do not become obese. That's just focusing on don't eat too much and becoming obese is really about obesity primarily. And then the last one is don't drink alcohol don't drink alcohol in excess and sleep well. Mm-hmm. So what you're really looking at is, and we kind of talked about this before we got on, is avoiding excess. So don't eat too much, don't drink too much, don't do drugs, don't smoke. I mean, and those are toxins to your body, and focus on your sleep. And that's like 80+% of health.
Right.
And instead of focusing on, again, some silly, like, oh, I have to drink this particular coffee, or I have to put, extra cream in my coffee or no cream in my coffee, or whether one drink or two drinks is better for you per day, rather than recognizing that really, if it comes down to it, just don't drink. And that's going to be better for you than anything. It always just blows my mind on that. Now, you did touch upon things like some of the gizmos and gadgets, and there's a time and place for it. The more you can gamify good health information, and because we have this addictiveness with cell phones, and they know it. It's like all these social media apps and the games, they know how to make things as habit forming as possible. But the more you can use those gadgets to identify and create a consistent, good, healthy habit, like say, if your watch is pinging you when you're holding your breath or whatever, or if it's just reminding you to get up and move, hey, you've been sitting for an hour or so, maybe we'll give you a little cow prod and get you just to move around for 10 minutes. That makes a lot of sense. But you just don't see that in the news quite as much. You don't see this in these published articles, and this even goes to all the magic bullet therapies when we're talking about pain. They get these, one article on 2 people by a medical device company that has $50 million in venture capital money behind it. And then it's going to say, oh, this new magic bullet we think that, whatever, we're going to stick this thing in, you're talking about the Renovate or whatever, we're going to stimulate these back muscles, and with using a device that's going to cost you $50,000 rather than a superficial TENS device that will cost you $5, do the same damn thing.
It's I think this all comes down to a lot of particular concepts, and it is that the flashy things get the attention of people. It gets them thinking that this is the next thing without conceptually understanding how pain works. And so it's hard for people to recognize what that flashy thing, what is it that it's doing. First of all, I usually don't understand that, and no offense, but many people don't. They just go and try to find the thing that might give them, relief. The fix, right? And so the flashy things get the attention, and if you have a lot of money behind the advertising to draw even more attention, then you are in a population that's vulnerable to that kind of marketing. And the things that seem so boring, like all the things you just listed off on that article, means that people have to address all the different habits and lifestyle things that basically are their ways of adapting to life and stress itself. And that's extremely uncomfortable, and it requires change. Humans don't like change. And so all those things that are very relevant, it's not really appealing, and it takes a lot of work, and not just on one day. It requires work over time and a commitment to that. And the problem is that people won't believe it until they experience it, which requires the dedication and the commitment to even get to the point that you recognize that you can change. I mean, just look at people that people are I find fascinating. I come from a family of thin people and obese people, and the lifestyles lead to those issues. And so it's always interesting how people who have found ways, suddenly they lose weight, they change their life, and they're still the same person, but they finally decided enough's enough, or they made a change or whatever it was. And then they have these significant differences between their before and after. And somehow that creates more belief in the process and some sense of just hope for someone who's struggling, when you have a harder time giving much attention to the people that have been doing those habits their whole life and could have been obese, but because it doesn't exist, it's harder to like really believe and identify with those people. I know we're kind of going on a tangent, but that's, the basis for all these little things that really can make a difference in your life. It's hard for people to really believe them or want to put the effort into them. It's easier sometimes to just have someone do something to you for that supposed fix, because it's easier to believe that's the new thing.
Well, that comes down to like a lot about beliefs and beliefs restructuring, right? So there's a couple of different beliefs that have to come with any shift to occur. And the first one is that you have to believe that change is possible, right? And a lot of people will believe that, change is possible. But the next thing is that change is possible for me, which is what you were identifying. And it is much easier to believe that change is possible for you when you have seen somebody who is like you successfully do that change, right? And then the last belief that you have to counter is that I can do it, that change is possible for me. Now that oftentimes is the hardest one to actually, I'm not even going to say that's the hardest one. The first one is really being able to recognize that change is possible, period, I would say, for pain. But each one of those is a step, right? And so those, whatever we say, or who says, particularly when it comes to pain, having somebody else who's gone through that process and have them saying it carries a vast greater weight, because that's them, right? They can easily see themselves in them. And it's the same way if you're a healthcare provider, as being able to have people in the public that are supporting your message, because we're not them. As the doctor, we're typically not in the them category. We're in a different group. And so what we say could make a difference, but it's not as powerful as somebody who is them, their peer, their family member, their friend, or whoever who's done that. I mean, you can think about it just in kind of regular persuasive roles is, there's a new restaurant, it looks all great and has the ads, and you're like, that looks kind of interesting. But what's more powerful, seeing that, or than having one of your friends tell you, I went there and I ate it and it was amazing and it was the best meal ever. Mm-hmm. That's a peer, right? And particularly if it's somebody that you trust, and you're like, well, they're like me and they had this amazing experience, then I'm more likely to have this amazing experience. I do it. Now, restaurants are obviously easier than pain or health or anything else, but it's very similar in that way, is that having somebody close to you who you identify with go through that change successfully is way more believable than anything else.
Right. And that kind of just brings full circle the psychology of, like, the psychology behind how you are, not that people want to think that they're being persuaded, but they are, whether it's from a surgeon who has a lot of confidence, that is convinced that the thing that they have, and there's times where there's a time and a place for surgery, but there are times when surgery is sold in a way that both parties think that this is appropriate, and even if it's not. And then there's the idea of just even having things published, that apparently being published makes it 100%, something to believe, when, first of all, we don't know everything. And that's the whole reason research exists, is because we're trying to understand things better. And like you said in that article, I mean, a lot of the stuff that's out there is they're trying to split hairs into multiple things, when it's not necessarily going to be the thing that really is the thing that really moves the needle for a lot of people's lives. And but yeah, what's interesting, some people, because they hear it from on high, that this white ivory, this white ivory tower that has all these people in these positions that say that this is what you should be focusing on for pain relief or for improving your life, that there's not a lot of research into the research, and so it's easier for people to take it at face value.
That comes back to, and probably a lot of people listening to this don't know who John Ioannidis is, but he's published multiple studies based on what gets published, and how much of what we do in medicine is nonsense, that isn't supported. That expert guidelines are expert, but what are those expert guidelines? They're usually flawed opinions in a lot of ways. And so there's so many retractions, which gets another wing on the news cycle, is they'll publish publish something new, and people say, drink a cup of coffee a day, it's going to keep you from ever getting Alzheimer's. And then 5 or 10 years ago, or 10 years from now, when an article sends out, "Oop, that was wrong," and they have to retract it, that gets no press, but the damage has already been done.
Right.
And so there's multiple different points for this. First of all, I am not one to ever say that you don't trust the research, because research at least provides us some sort of bedrock, and it's better than opinion. But you have to be able to examine the research critically in such a way. And that means questioning your own belief systems as well as whoever else is involved in this. That people don't do that, right? People tend to clutch. There's a lot of theories right now in pain that people are clinging to with their tight little grips and refusing to believe. And you have 2 research studies, and they're saying, see, the research shows this works. But then you have to, well, is that research duplicated? No, it hasn't been duplicated. Is that research built on a flawed or a misconception, which a lot of it is? So much research, the research is only good as the inputs that put in there. And if your inputs are flawed from the get-go because the foundation isn't right, then your downstream effects are all going to be flawed. And and I think a lot of that, particularly when we're looking at pain, that happens a lot. Because if you're moving into a research study with a flawed understanding of pain, it's going to affect everything downstream, and we've seen that. Because there was actually a piece. This was I think it was a systematic review that Mosley had done 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and it had to do with what people how they had applied things like cognitive behavioral therapies and things like that. And it really is somewhere in the last 40 plus years, because the psychologists used to be ahead of the curve and they're not anymore. But this idea, when you understand pain is a constructed process that can change, if you understand that, then everything downstream changes. But if you come in with pain is this thing that can't change and can only be managed now, everything that comes after that initial hypothesis is going to be flawed. And he was using an argument of, why are the outcomes with cognitive behavioral therapies not very good? And it's, well, if you go in there, a process where you're actually supposed to be modulating someone's brain and change thought patterns and things like that, but you're telling them that their pain can't change, then what do you think is going to happen in the end? Right. You're going to have So it's, I don't know where I was going with that, other than the fact that we need research, but we need to be critical about the research.
Right. And that's hard even for some of us physicians to really get into the nitty gritty of some of that. And we can, generally speaking, see how things are laid out. But for the general public, I think it's hard. And that's the struggle, I think, is that, there are people willing to do certain things that are not really proven, or don't have the best data to support that they're really effective long-term.
Ooh, I got a great one there. I got to interrupt. That's the stem cells and the PRP injections that are like the gold. That's the new gold rush in the pain world. Yeah. And it's based on ridiculousness and garbage, and they're hurting people. I just saw, there was 5 or 6 cases now in Iowa where people have these reactions or infections because of the crap that they're getting injected with no data other than what the company's supplying, saying that the stuff works. But it's a cash-based process. When people are paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for these injections, they have no reason. They really don't have any reason to think critically about this stuff when you're raking in the money like this, and it feels good. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I had a friend ask me about what I thought about stem cells and PRP and all this stuff, and I first have to stop and I kind of chuckle, because I'm sitting here trying to emphasize to people how incredibly ingenious your body is, and how they're just cultivating the genius of the body already, and mixing it up and returning it in a different pattern or different concentration into another location. And it's basically saying, this is such an awesome part of the body that, or just the body's so awesome, it creates this stuff that we can't replicate ourselves, and let's just put it back in and see what it does. I mean, it's when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not quite as invasive and concerning as like an anterior posterior back fusion. That's not necessary. Okay, I might buy that. But I feel like it's still a gamble on whether you believe it or not, or if it has have an impact. There's not enough data to support, say, this is, I feel like it's another fad, like the low T clinics. Like, okay, yeah, hormones are important, but not everyone needs to go get testosterone. Not everyone needs to go smoke pot just because it's legal. Like, people need to think about what they're doing and be selective. And, if someone wants to go pay cash and they just think, well, it might just affect the nociceptive input or something, I'm not going to tell them what to do, but I think that to sell it as a panacea or panacea for any pain out there, that's just as faulty as a lot of these other things that are a big fad.
Yeah, well, and I used to think that if people just paid for it, that's okay. But the fact of the matter is, and to actually be informed enough to know where you're putting that money is extraordinarily difficult. And then for me, it's like, if you actually know what you need to know before the injection, you would never have the injection done to begin with.
Right.
And so,
right.
and so it's never informed, right? That's the big joke within medicine, is this whole idea of informed decision making. And it's like, most of the time you can't have a truly informed decision because you're not aware of all the variables involved. And it's so important that you have practitioners. I'm totally going off that. The practitioners understand what the hell they're doing, because they have such a profound responsibility given on the limited amount of information that other people have. And everybody's, I Googled it and I got 42 pages and I know this better than the doctor is. And I'm like, there's certain scenarios that might be right, but there's most of the scenarios I'd say you're not, because when you go to medical school, what you're really doing is you are learning a new language, one that uses the same words of English, but it's completely different connotation. If you don't have that medical background and you think you're reading a research study and you're fully understanding it with absolutely no background, I don't think that's going to happen unless you have maybe 15, 20 years that you've been doing it and you've been working with somebody to tell you what it actually means, because we use words in different ways.
Yeah.
And and it's I don't know, it's an awesome responsibility on the physician part, but on the other part, if you have an inherent trust and you understand, like you were saying, that the body is an amazing thing, it is unbelievable what its resiliency is. Most of it is irrelevant. It's just focus on those few big levers that you can do, and everything else will relatively take care of itself. Right.
Yeah. I had an experience today with a patient before a surgery, of course, a back pain, imagine that, concern, which was fascinating to hear a surgeon say, oh yeah, I did his ALIF and it obviously didn't get all of the pain. So
you just scrape out the pain, right? They just, pull it out.
We go do an SI fusion,
Of course. That's the other one.
So it just, I paid a lot of close attention to kind of what they're doing, and I'm looking at, the rep is technically saying that they have to go in and they have to scrape out the cartilage in between the sacrum and the ilium, which is the hip, and they have to kind of grind that out, suck it out, and then they have to put the bone matrix stuff, and they put 2 screws. And to me, my belief in most cases is when there's no trauma involved, like no major trauma of major displacement where they're not even connected. My belief from science that I've read and whatnot is that our body enjoys a variety of movement, and a little bit of movement, even in the joints, is okay if it's not too much. But to me, to fuse something that has just a little give, even if it barely moves, doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, there's a reason that has a little give.
Yeah.
That's the thing that just, there's a reason that joint is like that. And if you're going to think that your procedure is better, it's just acid. There's the reason the sacroiliac joint moves like that is because it provides, it's a stress release valve.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're going to take that away because you think you know better than your body does.
Yeah.
It's like, I should go back because I want to make sure this is actually true. But I got the impression that, in the 50s and 60s, when the breast formula was coming out onto the market, everybody was telling mothers, well, you should use formula because that breast milk isn't very good. Because I think I was fed formula, and I'm sure my mom heard something about this stuff being and it's like, and then 20 years later, after these new companies sold their formula, actually, there's a reason breast milk is like the perfect thing for a baby.
Yeah.
And it's been, honed over millennia to make the perfect infant formula. Yeah. And yet because we can't sell it or package it, or we make up this new device, we're going to, like the SI joint, we're going to say, well, there's too much movement in there. Bullshit.
Uh-huh.
It's meant to do that. That's the reason it's there.
Yeah. Well, to kind of end on this little conversation today, this particular patient had been on opioids for like 8 years, and like 8 doses a day, and I told him straight up, I said, I'm not here to judge you being on opioids. I said, but the reality is that there are side effects. And the point was, he had 3 different medications related to the side effects of the opioids, and these weird neuropathies, and this like increase in sensitivity to pain, and severe GI constipation, and a lot of problems, gastroparesis, slowing of the stomach. And they asked, well, could this neuropathy be related? I'm like, I would bring up this conversation with your primary care physicians, whoever's prescribing this. I said, and if they don't understand what opioid-induced hyperalgesia is, then you should get a second opinion. I say this from someone who's, someone who's boarded in pain and understands this stuff. And what was fascinating, that there was 2 things. The thought that maybe these symptoms were related because they can't explain it with all those opioids going on. The fact I kind of reassured them that is a possibility. I can't say, but the reality is you don't know till you come off of it. That was one thing. The other thing was, this patient was trying to tell me that, I could come off of it. I've got a tough mind. I said, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's great you have a strong mind. I said, but the reality is what your body is used to. I said, you're created a new pharmacy in your body, and everything that you've been taking in, it's used to. And so you got to almost sneak it out of there and be smart about how you do it, so that you don't feel miserable, because your pain can increase when you go in withdrawal because you don't have your opioids. I said, there's a smart way to do it and a less painful way of doing it. And you just see all these lights going on between the wife and this person is young.
Mm.
And the reality that he could come off of it is just planting that and giving people education, which is why we're here, to inspire and empower people and just create information that they can use with their physicians, I think is why the Paindora Podcast exists, because our voices, I feel like we have a lot to say to maybe help some people.
Well, and there's a lot to say, and for anybody listening out there, send us your comments, send us your questions, because the other thing is, we have questions that we think people may want answered. We have questions that we certainly want, or we have answers we certainly want people to know, but the best answers are for the questions that you have. And so if you have questions, send them in to us. You can Dr. Kevin at straightshothealth.com, or what's your email list?
Dr@challengedoctor.com. dr@challengedoctor.com. You spell out challenge doctor. I've got all kinds of easy emails, but that one, you just go to the Challenge Doctor website and hit the contact form.
There you go.
That's easier.
But really the fact that there's some very big levers that you can use to completely change your life when it comes to pain, when it comes to your health, when it comes to overall wellness. They're not mysterious. you don't need to pay $4,000 to have the magic bullet injection. But it's out there, and I guess that comes as this belief threshold, though, is to understand that yes, health is not nearly as complicated as people have wanted you to think it is. And when it comes to pain, it's challenging, but you can have outcomes that are so much better than what is being currently sold to you. It's just remarkable.
Yeah. Well, until next time, the Paindora Podcast wants to fill in a whole bunch more information, inspiration, and hope, and we're looking forward to your questions and addressing them in future episodes. Until next time, as Dr. Kevin says, be well or stay well.
Stay well, folks.